So what happened? How did a project that showed so much promise and received so much press fail to meet the needs of the villagers? I wanted to ask William McDonough, the lead designer and highest profile American associated with the project. Over the course of a month, McDonough turned down my repeated requests for an interview. He wouldn't be available for months, his assistants told me. Citing dissatisfaction with previous media coverage, his communications director said that they would instead write their own article about what happened in Huangbayu. McDonough is also the co-chair of the China-U.S. Center for Sustainable Development, a group of Americans and Chinese who coordinated and planned the project. So I tried interviewing Rick Schulberg, the executive director of the American side. He too rejected my request. Instead, he referred me to Kent Snyder, an attorney who volunteers with the center as a business advisor. I reached Snyder at his home in Portland, Oregon. The last time he was in the village was more than 2 years ago. When I asked him what had happened in Huangbayu, he blamed Dai Xiaolong, the developer.
When Mr. Dai builds houses, people will move into them if they want to. And if they don't, if he doesn't do a good enough job, then they're not going to move.
Snyder said responsibility does not lie with the American side.
It is not our project. It's not our village. We're just trying to help.
But one observer disagrees.
I know that McDonough cares a lot about this project, and I think he's concerned about it. But I find it slightly disingenuous when he will say that a lot of the errors in the project are purely the responsibility of Dai Xiaolong.
Shannon May is a PhD candidate in anthropology at the University of California, Berkeley. She's writing her dissertation on Huangbayu, where she lived from May 2005 to November 2006. During her time there, she documented the lives of the villagers and watched the new houses go up. But she also observed the work of McDonough and the center, both in China and the United States. She agrees that Dai cut corners on materials and construction costs. Although Dai told me that there were problems in quality, he also said that they had been fixed. Still, when I entered the new homes, I could clearly see signs of poor construction, cracks in the wall, chipped and cracked ceilings. But May also says the China-U.S. Center for Sustainable Development bears responsibility for the project because they were involved in picking Dai in the first place.
And they picked him without ever doing any due diligence to see, was he a real estate developer? Had he ever built 10 buildings before, let alone 400, which is what the master plan calls for? He had never built one building before. He had never built one home.
Snyder denied that the Americans had a role in choosing Dai, but he ultimately acknowledged that the center did take part in the final selection.
It's like you got chocolate ice cream and vanilla ice cream and strawberry ice cream. Which one do you want to use? Well, strawberry looks good. It seemed like the location that the local government, the Benji government, was behind it, and you had an entrepreneur who appeared, say that he was willing to put money into it to make it work, and the villagers had collectively voted and talked about it, and they wanted to do it. So those kinds of pieces just seemed it made sense.
I asked him about performing due diligence on Dai.
Here's how I look at it. You work with what is there. And so we didn't do any kind of due diligence on anybody. I didn't think that wasn't our role. Again, it's not our village.
He pointed out that the villagers supported the plan.
There was an initial master plan that was then presented to the villagers, which they adopted, they endorsed.
But May says the villagers were never consulted in a meaningful way. Here's how she describes their perspective.
The fact that they were shown this plan is discussed that there's a lot of participation and that everyone approved of it. But if you can imagine being someone who has no running water, creates a fire every day to boil water and have warmth, just this immensity of physical labor that you have to do for you and your family to survive, and then you go into this room and you see this poster on the wall, and you've never seen a map of your village before, and having people who you see as being powerful, government officials, party members, foreigners, tell you that this will make your life better. Yes, residents of that village looked at that poster and listened to these men talk and said, yeah, I'll try that. Of course they would.
She said that there was never a meeting with the whole village. Participation was limited to the 31 villagers on the village committee.
the villagers were never consulted in detail again. And so to claim that they're participatory or that they chose this for themselves, I find incredibly naive on the part of the people running the project.
I asked Dai Xiaolong how he had deviated from the plans, Snyder told me, that were designed in collaboration with the villagers. He admitted to rearranging the orientation of the houses during construction, because, he said, McDonough's original layout didn't fit Chinese feng shui. But there was another problem, according to May. Dai and his employees had the designs, but they didn't know what to do with them.
And when you take something that's new, even to people in America, and you send it to what would be considered a poor village within China, the reason you're sending it is because they don't know how to use it. Shouldn't a tremendous amount of human resources come with that?
Snyder agrees, to an extent.
Well, if you don't have somebody on site that really has that expertise, it gets difficult. And I think that's part of what happened, and that's part of it's in the assessment. It's like, well, you really need to have closer, not from us, but just better expertise, better understanding, and capacity building to see how to make things work right. Everybody has come into this with good motives. It's just not always enough.
In a narrative that accompanied the master plan before ground broke in the new village, the author stated, "The yards may be too small to support the number of livestock that currently occupy many yards in the village." When I mentioned this to Kent Snyder, he said that Dai made the yards even smaller. But when I compared the footprint of what was built to that of the original plan, the difference looked negligible. In fact, the master plan that is on the center's website actually had many more houses in the same space. A later version had slightly fewer houses, but was also on a smaller area. And while the houses vary in size, if you compare most of them to the footprint of one of the original demonstration homes, there isn't much difference. Still, while villagers criticize the yards, it turns out someone may actually make money from the vegetables grown in them. If you are wondering why there is so much vegetation next to these empty houses, that's because Dai hired villagers to plant crops in the vacant yards. Here is a garage full of potatoes that belong to Dai. Most of the houses have a garage, which came as part of the design. Shannon May thinks this is another example of how the plan wasn't appropriate for the villagers. Most people get around by walking. May estimates there are about 4 or 5 cars in this village of more than 1,400 people. It's a bit ironic, including garages in the plans for a sustainable village, especially in a community where most people don't drive, at least not yet. So why did the designers include garages in their plans? Unfortunately, I couldn't ask McDonough about this because he declined my request for an interview. When I asked Kent Snyder about the garages, he didn't seem to remember them.
They include garages?
Yeah.
Huh, I didn't know that.
In a further irony, the planners expected the population to become affluent enough to afford automobiles. But living in the new village without new jobs, how would villagers increase their wealth? Snyder says the center is trying to help foster small-scale, locally sustainable businesses. But Shannon May said that the center left the Chinese side expecting much more.
They did, certainly, expect that there would be a factory.
If you look at the goals of the project, throwing a factory in there wouldn't fit with the goal.
But May and others on the Chinese side told me that the center said it would work to bring outside investment to set up industry in the village. She said that visits by delegations of foreign planners and corporate representatives from the center's board raised expectations.
Oh, there's so much anticipation, and after that, so much disappointment, because, like this woman was saying to me, she's like, why would they keep coming? Why do they come and not build anything? Why are they here if they're not going to invest in a factory? It doesn't make sense to me.
I asked Kent Snyder about this.
I could see where people would see, wow, I saw it in their faces. Wow, look at these Westerners here, and money is going to be flowing in here by the bushel basket. And no, it's because, again, it's not replicable. It's not sustainable.
Did the center make it clear this wasn't going to happen?
I don't know. I mean, it's not our village. But one of the things that we've really learned is, you got to watch out for these expectations.
The village's Communist Party secretary told me that the Americans have not lived up to their side of the partnership, and as a result, the government has lost face. The Americans, she said, fool the Chinese, and it is an international joke. So who is responsible for what happened in Huangbayu? According to the Americans, that would be Dai Xiaolong, the developer. For his part, Dai told me that the Americans simply came to the village and pointed here and there without any investment. Although I wanted to talk with Dai more about this and about the construction questions, he only really wanted to discuss his latest green venture, a new gas plant. Caught in the middle of the villagers, according to Shannon May, officials in Benxi City won't allocate any more major investments to Huangbayu until the new village project is complete, and that won't happen anytime soon. To make matters worse, the village has lost productive cropland, which was bulldozed to make space for the development. Meanwhile, William McDonough's Huangbayu plan is no longer featured on his own firm's website. When I first walked into the village, I passed a huge rock placed near the road. Carved into the front are 3 Chinese characters that spell out Huangbayu. On the back, I saw 3 English letters etched in red. HBY, Huangbayu. But HBY also spells out the initials of a sloganish Chinese phrase, Haobangyang. Translated into English, that means a good example.
There's more of the world to explore on our website. Discuss the world and tell us what you think of our stories from a small planet at pbs.org.